The first time my neighbor used my driveway like it belonged to him, I figured maybe it was just a mistake. The 10th time, I realized it wasn't a mistake at all. By the time I parked my old pickup there and left it sitting for good, I wasn't angry anymore. And somehow that made the whole thing hit a whole lot harder. My name's Owen Mercer, and for almost 6 years, I've lived on a quiet street just outside Franklin Ridge, Tennessee, in one of those neighborhoods where people wave when they're checking the mail and everybody acts like things stay simple as long as no one makes a scene. Most days they do. Mine did too, until Caleb Dawson moved into the corner house next door. Caleb was one of those guys who somehow managed to come off friendly and dismissive at the exact same time. Tall, clean-cut, always carrying coffee in one hand and keys in the other, always moving like he had somewhere more important to be than wherever he already was. He smiled a lot. Not warm smiles either. More like the kind that says he's already decided how things work and everyone else will eventually catch up. At first, I didn't think much about him. We'd nod across the yard, maybe exchange a few words about the weather, the usual stuff neighbors do when they don't really know each other. Then one morning I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing out a coffee mug when I heard tires on concrete. That caught my attention because the sound was way too close. I looked out the window, and there was Caleb's black Tahoe halfway into my driveway, cutting across the bottom corner of it before swinging back into the street. Just a smooth little U-turn like he'd done it 100 times before. I actually laughed under my breath and thought, well, that's weird. Then the next morning, he did it again. Then again that afternoon. And then again 2 days later. After about a week, I started noticing how automatic it had become. He'd roll down the block, overshoot his angle, drift straight over my property line, turn wide across the bottom of my driveway, and head back out like that stretch of pavement had been built specifically for him. Now, my driveway isn't some tiny strip. It runs along the left side of my lot, broad and clean, and I spent a little over $4,000 resurfacing the whole thing 3 years ago after the original slab had cracked to hell under the previous owner. I saved for months to get that done right. New finish, clean edges, sealed properly. It mattered to me because I take care of what I own. Maybe that sounds old-fashioned, I don't know, but I was raised by people who believed if you worked hard enough to buy something, you respected it. So standing there every morning watching tire tracks roll over that clean concrete started getting under my skin in a way I couldn't shake. The thing was, Caleb had options. At the end of the block, there was a full cul-de-sac, plenty of room to turn around without touching anyone's property. He just didn't bother. Mine was quicker, easier, and some people get real comfortable with easier when it costs them nothing. I stayed quiet longer than I should have. That's probably on me. I figured maybe he'd realize eventually and stop. Maybe he didn't understand exactly where the line was. But I knew where it was. County survey stakes had been driven in before I bought the place. The plow was on file. No easement, no shared access, nothing remotely gray about it. That concrete belonged to me and only me. One Saturday afternoon, I finally walked over. Caleb was in his garage, pretending to organize tools while college football played on a mounted TV in the corner. He saw me coming and smiled. "Hey, Owen." I said, "Hey, Caleb. Got a quick thing?" "Sure." I kept it easy, calm, no edge in my voice. "I've noticed you've been using the bottom of my driveway to turn around. I'd appreciate it if you used the cul-de-sac instead." He stared for maybe half a second too long, then gave this little shrug. Yeah, come on, man. It takes like 2 seconds. "I know. Still my driveway." He laughed, not mean exactly, but not respectful either. Didn't think it was a big deal. "To you, maybe." He took a sip of coffee and leaned back against the workbench. "I'm not parking there. I'm just turning around." That one almost got me. The confidence in his voice, like he'd found some loophole because his tires weren't staying long enough to count. I nodded and kept my tone flat. "I hear you. I'd still like you not to." He smiled again. Same smile. "Sure." And right then I knew he wasn't going to stop. Because some people say sure the exact same way other people say absolutely not. Monday morning I'm making eggs and I hear tires again. I didn't even need to look, but I did anyway. Caleb's Tahoe slid across the bottom of the driveway, smooth as ever, and disappeared back into the street. Like we'd never had the conversation. I just stood there with a spatula in one hand and watched him go. No jitting, no middle finger, Nothing dramatic. Just this weird calm settling over me. I shut the stove off, walked out onto the backside of the property, and looked at my old truck sitting beside the shed. A faded blue 1998 Ford F-150. Nothing fancy. Little rust on the bumper. Bench seat cracked down the middle. But it still ran, still registered, still insured. And as I stood there with cicadas buzzing and heat rolling off the grass, I had one of those simple ideas that feels obvious the second it lands. If Caleb needed my driveway because it was convenient, maybe convenience was the thing I needed to take away. By sunset, that truck was idling at the bottom edge of the driveway. I backed it in slow, lined it up carefully, and shut it off with all four tires planted squarely on my side of the property. Didn't block the road, didn't cross the line, didn't touch 1 inch of his land. I stood there for a minute looking at it, arms crossed, feeling strangely peaceful. Then I went inside, made dinner, and waited. Caleb knocked less than 20 minutes later. Not a casual tap, either the kind of sharp knock that says somebody already decided they're irritated before the door even opens. I set my glass down on the kitchen counter, walked over, and opened the front door. He was standing there in a gray polo and jeans, one hand on his hip, the other holding his truck keys, and his expression looked almost offended, like somehow I'd done something strange. He nodded toward the driveway. "What's with the truck?" I looked past him like I genuinely had to check what he meant. "The Ford." "Yeah, it's parked." He let out a little breath through his nose. "You're blocking the turn." I leaned against the frame. "What turn?" His jaw tightened. "Come on, Owen. No, seriously." I said it calm enough that it almost made him more irritated. "What turn?" He stared at me, then looked back toward the driveway and back again. "The turn I use when I back out." "You mean on my property?" That landed. He shifted his stance. "It's just where I swing through." "Exactly." He gave this little forced laugh. "You really parked a whole truck there because of this?" "I parked my truck on my driveway because I wanted to." "That's petty." "Maybe," I said. "Still my driveway." For a second, neither of us said anything. I could hear a lawnmower a few houses down, somebody's dog barking behind a fence. Caleb's face did that thing where someone's trying to stay polite because technically they don't have an argument, but they're frustrated they can't get their way. Finally, he said, "So what, are you going to leave it there?" "Probably." "That's ridiculous." "Then I guess we both think the other guy's being ridiculous." That one hit harder than I expected. He stared another second, then muttered something under his breath and walked back across the grass. I watched him get into the Tahoe, reverse carefully, and miracle of miracles turn using the actual street without touching my driveway at all. Funny how fast people discover alternatives when the easy option disappears. For a couple days, things were quiet. And honestly, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Truck stayed parked. Caleb stopped cutting through. No more tire marks. No drama. But then Thursday morning, I was grabbing the paper when my neighbor Diane from across the street gave me this amused little smile. Diane had lived there forever. Mid-60s, retired school counselor, sharp as a tack, knew everybody's business before they knew it themselves. She waved and called out, "Your truck seems popular this week." I laughed. Word travels fast. Caleb mentioned it. Of course he did. And she folded her arms and grinned. "He said you blocked access. Access to my own driveway." That's about what I said. We both laughed. Diane lowered her voice. "Between you and me, honey, he did the same thing to the Reynolds before they moved. Used to cut over their curb every morning because he didn't feel like backing up." That made me pause. "Seriously?" And they said something? Apparently. Didn't matter much. I looked over toward Caleb's place. "Interesting." Diane gave me that neighborhood veteran smile. "Some folks only understand boundaries once they bump into one." Then she headed inside. That sat with me all morning, because suddenly this wasn't just some random habit. Caleb had probably been doing versions of this for years, testing little limits, taking shortcuts, assuming nobody wanted the awkward conversation enough to stop him. And honestly, he wasn't wrong most of the time. People avoid friction. We all do. A week later, I was out front trimming a hedge when Caleb came rolling home and stopped halfway in front of his mailbox. Window down, sunglasses on. "Still keeping the truck there?" "Looks like it." He smirked. "You know HOA's probably going to say something." I actually laughed at that. About a registered vehicle parked in my own driveway? Could happen. Good luck with that. He tapped the steering wheel and gave me that same smile. Wouldn't hurt to be neighborly. I clipped one more branch and looked over. Neighborly goes both ways. His smile faded. Then he drove off. That was Friday. Monday afternoon, I got a letter tucked under my front mat. HOA notice. Anonymous concern about a vehicle being stored improperly and creating a visual nuisance. I stood there staring at it and just started laughing. Not because it was funny exactly, more because it was so predictable. The truck was legal. Registration current. Insurance active. Parked properly. I knew that because I checked every detail before moving it. Caleb apparently hadn't. I emailed the HOA board photos, registration, county parking guidelines, and the exact section from the bylaws. Diane happened to be on the architectural committee and texted me 20 minutes later. You're completely fine. Also, this is hilarious. The complaint got dismissed by the next morning. Caleb didn't mention it. But I noticed something change after that. He started paying attention. If I was outside watering plants, he'd glance over. If I pulled into the driveway, he'd watch from the porch. Not angry exactly, more irritated that the usual pressure tactics weren't working. Then came Saturday afternoon, the real turning point. I was under the hood of the truck, checking fluids, when Caleb walked over carrying a beer like he was try for casual. Mind if we talk? Depends. He smiled thin. Look, man, this whole thing's gotten stupid. Agreed. I don't see why we need to make a war out of a turnaround. I didn't make it a war. He gestured at the truck. That sure looks like one. I wiped my hands on a rag. You had a perfectly good cul-de-sac 50 yards away. That's not the point. Feels like exactly the point. His expression tightened. You know what I mean? I did. And that was the interesting part. Because what he meant wasn't about turning radius or convenience. It was about expectation. He expected access because he'd gotten used to it. He expected my silence to continue because it always had. He expected the path of least resistance to stay open. And now it wasn't. I leaned against the fender and looked him straight in the eye. Caleb, if you'd asked me the first time, I probably would have said sure every once in a while. Maybe. But you didn't ask. You just decided. That hit him harder than anything else had. He looked down, then took a sip of his beer. Didn't think it mattered. That's kind of the whole issue. He stood there quiet for a second, and for the first time since he'd moved in, he actually looked a little embarrassed. Then he shrugged. Still feels excessive. I nodded. Maybe. Then I smiled. Good thing it's parked legally. He almost laughed at that despite himself. Almost. Then he shook his head and walked back toward his house. I figured maybe we were done after that. Maybe he finally got it. And for a little while, I think he did. No more cutting through. No complaints. No word comments. Just peace. Then one evening about 2 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch with iced tea when I saw headlights swing toward the driveway out of pure habit. Caleb had been distracted on his phone. Tahoe rolled halfway toward the opening and stopped dead when he saw the blue Ford sitting there exactly where it had been all along. He actually threw both hands up in frustration, reversed out, and looped toward the cul-de-sac like he should have been doing from day one. I nearly spilled my drink laughing. But what surprised me wasn't that he caught himself. It was what happened next. He slowed near the curb, rolled his window down, and looked over at me sitting there. There was this pause between us. Then he gave a single nod, not friendly, not annoyed, just acknowledgement. And I nodded back. Nothing dramatic. No speech. No apology. Just one quiet moment where we both understood the same thing at exactly the same time. Boundaries don't really need defending once they're made visible. Sometimes they just need something solid sitting right on top of them. The truck stayed there another month after that. And by then, nobody on the street even noticed it anymore except me and Caleb. The truck stayed there another month after that. And by then, nobody on the street even noticed it anymore except me and Caleb. Funny how quickly something turns invisible once people realize it isn't temporary. The blue Ford became part of the landscape, same as the maple tree near the mailbox, same as Diane's wind chimes across the street. People adjusted. The neighborhood moved on. And honestly, so did I, or at least I thought I had. Then one warm Thursday evening in late August, I was dragging the trash bins back up the driveway when Caleb called out from his porch. "Hey, Owen." His voice caught me off guard. Not because we hadn't spoken. We had. A few nods here and there, but there was something different in it. Less sharp, less guarded. I turned. Yeah. He walked halfway down his front path and stopped. No sunglasses. No coffee cup. Just him standing there with both hands in his pockets like he was rehearsing words in his head and wasn't thrilled about any of them. "You got a minute?" I looked at him, then nodded. "Sure." He crossed over and stopped a couple feet away. Close enough to talk, not close enough to feel casual. Then he exhaled and gave a tired little smile. I've been meaning to say something. I waited. He glanced down at the driveway, at the truck, then back up. I was kind of an ass about that whole thing. I'll admit, that wasn't what I expected. I actually stood there a second trying to decide if I'd heard him right. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck and gave this awkward laugh. My wife's been telling me for 2 months I should just say that out loud. Smart woman. I got a real smile out of him. First one I'd seen. He nodded. Yeah, she usually is. Then he got serious again. Truth is, I got used to using that cut-through before we even unpacked. First week we moved in, contractor trailers were blocking half my curb, and I started swinging through there because it was easier. Then it just became habit. After a while, I stopped thinking about it. That part one figured out. He winced a little. Fair. Then he shrugged. And when you brought it up, I don't know. I got stubborn. I laughed. Little bit. Okay, a lot. We both stood there quiet for a second with cicadas buzzing and sunlight dropping behind the trees. Then he said something I didn't expect. My dad used to do stuff like that. Like what? Act like convenience was more important than boundaries. Park wherever. Borrow things without asking. Push little lines until somebody finally snapped. He looked off toward the street. Used to drive my mom crazy. Then he gave a crooked smile. Guess some habits sneak up on you. That landed harder than either of us said out loud. Because honestly, I got it. We all carry things from people we grew up around. Little defaults we don't examine until somebody finally forces us to notice. I leaned against the truck bed and nodded. Well, you noticed. He looked at me and smiled. Yeah. Then he surprised me again. You keeping that truck there forever? I glanced at the Ford. Faded paint. Rust on the bumper. Still looking stubborn as ever. Hadn't decided. He laughed. Fair enough. Then he headed back home. And that probably could have been the clean ending. Nice little resolution. Neighbor learns lesson, everybody shakes hands, and sunsets roll in. Except real life usually leaves one thread hanging loose. A couple weekends later, I finally moved the truck. Needed space to unload lumber for a shed repair. I backed the Ford into the side yard again and figured I'd leave it there a day or two. I'll be honest, part of me was curious. Maybe more curious than I wanted to admit. Because once a line's been crossed enough times, even after things settle, some part of you wonders whether it really changed or whether people are just waiting for the chance. That afternoon, I was on a ladder replacing trim when I heard an engine slow down. My whole body reacted before my brain did. I looked up. Caleb's Tahoe rolled toward the driveway entrance. Same angle. Same exact setup as before. For half a second, my stomach tightened. Here we go. Then he stopped. Put the SUV in reverse. Backed up. Made a careful 3-point turn in the street without touching 1 inch of concrete. And drove off. I stood on that ladder grinning like an idiot. And that was it. No applause. No dramatic music. No revenge speech. Just a guy making a different choice than the one he used to make. Which honestly felt better than any argument ever would have. The truck eventually went back beside the shed. The driveway stayed clean. No tire marks. No circuits. No anonymous HOA complaints. And every now and then Caleb and I actually talk now football, weather, yard stuff. Normal neighbor things. Still not best friends. Probably never will be. But there's respect there. Real respect. The kind that only shows up after 2 stubborn people finally stop pretending they don't understand each other. Every once in a while, Diane still teases me from across the street. Need me to nominate that Ford for neighborhood landmark status? And I tell her if the board starts handing out plaques, mine better say boundary enforcement specialist. She laughs every time. Caleb too, when he hears it. And maybe that's the weird part, the thing I didn't expect from any of this. I thought protecting my space was going to create permanent tension. thought drawing a hard line meant somebody had to lose. But sometimes the line itself is what clears the air. Sometimes silence gets mistaken for permission. And the moment you calmly, clearly say no without yelling, without threatening, without making a show of it, everything shifts. People finally see where you stand. Some respect it, some don't. And sometimes the loudest statement you can make isn't words at all. It's an old blue pickup parked exactly where it belongs. But I'm curious what you think. Was parking that truck there the right move? Or was I just as stubborn as Caleb was? If you were in my shoes, would you have handled it differently, or would you have done the exact same thing? Drop your take in the comments, because around neighborhoods like ours, everybody's got an opinion when property lines and pride start colliding. And trust me, this street has plenty more stories where that came from.